Hello everyone, my name is Abdullah and you're watching Multicultural Civic Platform. Today we are pleased to have Dr. Natasha M. She is a Muslim chaplain for University of Manitoba. She will be sharing with us her experience with mental health and wellness among international students in Winnipeg. We're pleased to have you today.
Oh, thank you so much, Abdullah.
If you can start to talk more about yourself first.
Myself, okay, so I'm a psychologist by training, and I would say since the year 2020, since 2010, my mistake, when I graduated from university, I started having an interest in Islamic knowledge. And then I realized that I really wanted to have that combination of my training in psychology and Islamic knowledge. And I just had this interest in working with Muslim students, and so that's a little bit about me. I don't know if you have any other questions, but I was born in Montreal. I spent most of my time here in Canada, but I would say I grew up in the Caribbean. My parents are from a small island called Trinidad. And we came from a family where I would say my family didn't really practice Islam. My grandparents did, and I was very attached to them. And so that's how I was able to, in my later ages, I was able to really embrace the faith. And I actually, when I was an international student so I did my master's and my bachelor's. I did my bachelor's at McMaster in Ontario, and then my master's at McGill. But then I went to the United States to do my PhD, and I was an international student there. And it was when I was an international student, that's when I started practicing my faith. So, and then when I finished my degree, that's when I decided to come back to Canada, and I got a job at U of M, and I've been here since.
Inshallah.
Yes.
So what is your current role in University of Manitoba?
Yeah, so right now I work for the Spiritual Care and Multi-Faith Center, and I'm a psychologist and a Muslim chaplain there. And it's a brand new role. I just started the role in March of this year, but I've been kind of dabbling in the role since 2017.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, what is your role as Muslim chaplain in the University of Manitoba?
So my role is to provide, because I'm a psychologist, my role is to provide psychological services that are sensitive to the needs of Muslim students. So I also bring in aspects and tenets of our faith to support some of the interventions that I give when I'm doing my psychological services with students. I hope that makes sense. So I'm kind of incorporating the faith with psychology. And in my field in psychology, when I was doing my training and my doctorate, there was very little, very, very, very little about incorporating any kind of faith in our interventions. There's CBT and EFT and humanistic, but nothing really talking about faith.
No.
So, yeah.
That's amazing, So, as you're mentioning about, you were an international student,
Yes,
and
in the US.
Yes, how was the experience there as a student?
Oh my goodness. I think about my colleagues at the University of Manitoba, and I was like, do people who work with international students really know what it feels like to be an international student? Because until you are an international student, it's really hard to understand what that experience is like. So my experience there, I was lucky. I was living in a country that spoke English, right?
Yes.
So that was an easy transition for me. I can't even imagine going to a country where I don't speak the language, but it was super tough. And I'll tell you why it was tough, because I didn't have any family or friends in the city that I was living in. I felt super alone. And on top of that, there was this nonsense, I hate to say nonsense, but the American government called me an alien. Because as an international student or somebody who doesn't have an American citizenship or whatever, I'm considered an alien. I didn't like that. I'm not green with, pink spots or anything. But I was considered an alien by the government, and I always had to make sure that I was on top of my status. Like my documents, I was always at the border trying to make sure everything was in order. And one time I almost got sent back to Canada because of a mistake. And anyway, it was just a very stressful experience. And I hate filling out forms, so that was in addition to my schoolwork, it was another stress to deal with.
But as you mentioned, that experience is like a treasure when you're meeting with and counseling other international students from Muslims who are going through those similar challenges.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if you can just share briefly, what are some of the challenges, or the common face challenges, that students face when they want to practice Islam, in Canada?
Okay, so I would say, I think the clash between the expectations on us as Muslims and the Western culture, definitely. So just to give you a background, Abdulhad, so when I first went to the US, I was not practicing my faith, okay? And so how did I was feeling so alone and so depressed, and I was just feeling so out of sorts. And so I decided, okay, how am I going to make friends? I was living alone, so I was living in an apartment by myself. And I decided, okay, the way that I'm going to make friends is I'm going to join the International Students Association. So I did. And how did they socialize and, have this feeling of belongingness? Parties. So that's what I would do. I would go from students all over the world, I would go to parties and have fun. And of course, at these parties, there's dancing and drinking. And I'm sure I think one party I went to, there was drugs. And so, there was a lot of that going on. And here I am thinking, I don't know, is this how I'm supposed to be socializing? And so I would say that's a really big stressor that a lot of young people face, and a lot of international students. Like, how do I bridge the gap between my Muslim faith, how I was brought up from back home, and this Western culture, which is quite different? Yeah, it could really impact people's identity, and people want to belong, and they feel like they have to do these things in order to belong. I felt that too. I felt that pressure.
Is it like an emptiness that works inside, when people actually do not know? Because faith, when we look at faith, it gives us a purpose of life.
Absolutely.
But when we are not going towards that purpose, there's an emptiness in the heart, and that void cannot be fulfilled, with just like our partying, and
oh, absolutely.
So, and as you mentioned, like a lot of the students, when they come to this country, when they're alone, when they go to that very difficult experience, trying to find their purpose, of course, a lot of students are also struggling to make those hard decisions in life, like what do they want to be, So how do you balance, and of course, it's also very stressful, really a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression as well, loneliness, So how do you actually balance all the three together, like triangle-wise, how do you balance it when you're advising the students,
Well, Abdulhad, it's a process and a journey. It's not like you come in and have one session with me and, you found your place belonging and you know exactly what you want to do with your education, and suddenly you have this tight relationship with Islam. No, I mean, it's not like it happens in one session or overnight. And I can certainly say, for myself, okay, let me go back to how I deal with this with students. I have to meet students where they're at. I can't, let's say this is the end of the journey. I can't start there and counsel them from over here. I have to meet students from where they're at. So, for example, when I was, I'll use myself as an example because I'm not breaking any confidentiality when I do that. But when I first went to the US, and I was older, it's not like I was a young, teenager or anything. I was older because I was doing my PhD. I started that lifestyle of being with international students who weren't Muslim and having that partying and blah, blah. So at a certain point, I realized it wasn't giving me that fulfillment that you're talking about. A lot of my friends, they were dating and they were going out, and a little bit, I tried it a little bit, and I'm like, it wasn't leading me anywhere. I felt this big hole, this emptiness that you talked about. It was huge. And then I said to myself, this is not working. This formula is just not working for me. And at that point, I don't know how it happened. It must have been just from Allah. But I decided, okay, you know what? I'm going to start going to the masjid. I lived, I would say about, in terms of driving, maybe 2 minutes drive from the masjid. And I said, I'm going to start by going to Jummah. I wasn't praying, but I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start there. And that's what I did. And so that's, slowly, I started getting away from that other lifestyle, and I started getting more involved in the Muslim community. I met some amazing sisters, and who are still friends with me today. So anyway, I hope I answered your question.
But actually, like, that comes to the next question: how important is masjid, the mosque, in the life of a Muslim,
Huge. So I'll tell you another story. Like when I was in my doctorate program, I took a course on social justice, and so my professor said we all had to do a course on a social justice project. And so one of my friends, I was very involved with the indigenous community, like I had a lot of friends who were Navajo, and so I said to one of my Navajo friends, I said, I'm going to do a project on the Navajo. And my friend said to me, what? Are you serious? He said, you're not Navajo, why are you doing a project on the Navajo? And I'm like, yeah, he's right. And why am I doing a project on the Navajo? So then I said, the only identity that I can really think about was, of course, my Muslim identity. So I knocked on the door of another masjid in our city. There was apparently a conflict or tension between these two groups of Muslims in the city, and I knocked on the door of the other masjid, and a sister answered the door, and I said to her, I want to do a social justice project, and I'm thinking of doing it on Islamophobia. And she's like, come in, are you Muslim, blah, blah, blah. And that's how it all started. So yeah. Did I answer your question? I felt like I went on a tangent.
Especially like when it comes to like a lot of the international students, when they come to the university, they feel really lonely,
Yes.
In the first couple of months.
Yes.
And the first group of friends that they make will determine like how the future, Like if the group of friends are literally guiding them to the right thing, they'll have a really, really prosperous, years, in university. But if they do end up, in the wrong company, it can be really, really bad for them.
Yeah, it can be bad, but I'll tell you, Abdelhad, what led me, that first group of friends was the Western lifestyle, but what led me to find my community was my depression. My depression and that sense, that void, that frustration, that anger, that led me to that place where I said, this formula is not working for me and I have to find something better. And when I opened the door, that sister opened the door of the masjid that day, it was a click. And they had ended up being my people. Yeah, and I felt that, I have never, I'm going to be honest with you, I've never felt that sense of depression since, ever. I still get depressed sometimes, but not to the same level that I was before.
So if a person makes a statement, a person who's going through that depression of finding his purpose, is actually going to the right direction. Because if not, at least they're looking for answers and they actually know where the problem lies. Because a lot of people it's hard for them to find where the actual problem is.
Yes.
Right? But if they're going through that process and they're actually looking for help, because also another point that comes to how does counseling help? Because a lot of the people would love to try the level best to resolve the problems themselves, but they don't believe in so-called counseling or therapy.
That's right. Yeah.
How do you? What's your take on that?
Okay, so I'm going to assume, Abdelhad, by the time somebody comes to see me, they're already acknowledging that they're going to be talking about mental health.
Yeah.
And if they know that I'm Muslim chaplain, they also know at some point I may very well bring spirituality and faith into the conversation. So I just operate from that assumption. Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question, but I mean, students at the University of Manitoba can go to the Student Counseling Center and just work on their mental health, and they won't, they won't necessarily have those teachings, right? Yes. Or the counselors that they have may not obviously have the familiarity with Islam. But that's something certainly that I can provide to students, but only when students are ready to have that conversation and they're asking, and I feel like it's the right time to bring that topic up, then for sure we'll have that discussion. But again, if a student comes in and they're saying I don't know what to do with my degree, my parents told me that I should become a doctor, but I'm not doing well in my science classes. obviously I'm not going to be start talking about faith and depression and anxiety. I will start off, I mean, depression, it is important to talk about those things, but if they really just want help there, then we'll talk about career and what that means to them and what are their interests and, you know, what is their relationship with their parents like, and, you know, that's where we'll start at. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Also, like you spoke about, like you're also like working with the spiritual care.
Yes.
How important it is as a center, you know, to all the people who are practicing their faith.
Yes.
In the university.
Yes. Yes, it is. And you know, so Abdulhad, like I would say that the pandemic was a huge teacher for all of us, because I think during the pandemic when we were cut off, it's like, and I remember sharing this with one of my friends. I said, I almost feel, because there were all the restrictions, I feel like I am in outer space and I'm in this spaceship all by myself. And so here I am, I'm cut off from social connections. Any connections that I do have, it's virtual, it's on the phone or over the internet. Otherwise, I'm by myself. And I think a lot of people, whether you're old or young or in between, started having questions about what is the meaning of life? Is there a God? And if there is, what does that God look like? And what is my relationship with God? And I think a lot of people started having spiritual questions. And the Spiritual Care Center was just starting up at the University of Manitoba.
Yes, yes.
And I think the pandemic just pushed that center to kind of really develop, because they realized students were having so many questions about spirituality, and we needed to meet students in terms of helping them figure out those questions. Yeah.
And as you are a Muslim chaplain in the University of Manitoba, like, what is your relationship with the University of Manitoba Muslim Student Association?
Oh, my relationship, well, I would say I cannot be a Muslim chaplain without having a relationship with the MSA. Absolutely not. I started off with a relationship with the MSA. I think Zishan was the first MSA president that I kind of, you know, his team kind of approached me and I responded. And since then, I have had relationships with all of the presidents since then. And Yazan was a president at one point, right? So it was, and then
I think that's the time we started the Band-Aids, you know.
Yes.
Band-Aids for the Soul, that was the first program we started officially, you know, to address the mental health.
Yes.
And also like a safe space for people to actually just be themselves, you know, and speak about different perspective, different cultural issues, you know, and to hear about other people and their opinion, you know.
Yes.
It's also a really, really great place to actually just be that space, you know, be there as it is, you know.
Absolutely. As I said, it's important to have that relationship. And now you with Abdulhad and then with Miriam, like I'm hoping all along I'm going to have to continue have a really close relationship with the MSA. I can't do my job without the MSA. Yeah.
So over the years,
yeah,
of course, you have gone through many difficult challenges. And of course, not all the cases with the students are the same. Briefly, can you share with us one of the most difficult challenges faced with students and probably the difficult case you had to handle, you know?
Wow. Okay, so I see I don't want to break confidentiality here.
You can change the name, it's fine.
No, even if I change, because our community is so small, people all know, I know who she's talking about. Well, I can talk about a recent case that I dealt with where one of our students, you know, I'll use the pronoun there, so I don't identify the person too much. You know, their student visa was denied. Going through a process of renewing their student visa, but it was denied. And so they were sent a letter asking them to leave the country right away. And I would have to say that was since I've been a Muslim chaplain, that has been the most difficult situation that I've dealt with, where a student was in extreme distress and very close to finishing their degree. You know, like what timing? If it's at the beginning of your degree, that's one thing, but it's when it's at the end and you only have a couple of courses left, it's devastating, right? And you can't take those courses online. Let's say the university is not offering those courses online, it's in person. So I would have to say that was one of the most difficult, and I just felt for my client, because it's what a horrible thing to do. You've worked so hard and then you're getting this kind of letter, you know, as you're getting ready to wrap up and face a new journey. So I would have to say the most difficult part of my job is when I had to deal with systems. And what I mean by that is like the system of the government. Because in that situation, there was a lot of like consulting lawyers, writing letters to lawyers, figuring out like, okay, how does the government work? I don't know much about the government. And I can think about another situation where I had to deal with a court. This is not with MSA, this is outside of MSA, but also Muslim clients. And it's like when I had to do with the systems, the legal system, the government, that's when it becomes challenging to me, because I don't know how these systems operate, but the status of my client very much depends on the outcome. Their mental health depends on the outcome of how is the court case going to go? Are they going to be able to stay in Canada or not? So, yeah.
That's probably really challenging, you know, especially those students, you know, we feel for them, those who can see the end of the tunnel, like the degree is almost done, but still getting the letter of refusal, you know, from the government. It's really challenging.
Absolutely.
And quite recently, you know, the cases have been increasing, quite recently about the status, especially international students, they're having their, not just the study permit, but even the work permit, a lot of them got denied, you know. And quite recently we had many cases, you know, where people are going through those mental health challenges, you know.
Oh, big time.
And this is like, in pandemic, the challenges were quite different, you know. We had death cases, you have people who were depressed, you know, because they're locked up, you know.
Absolutely.
That was one thing.
Well, you know, well, we had, what, 8 students, Muslim students who died in 7 months at the University of Manitoba. I was devastated.
Devastated. And of course, like one of the hardest challenges for a student to carry his own friend, you know, and put him towards the graveyard.
Absolutely.
That's the hardest part.
Absolutely. And you know, out of those 8 students, Abdulhad, 6 were international students.
Yes.
And male. Most of them were male.
Male students, yeah.
So, like, is it because as men they don't feel comfortable coming to talk to somebody like me? Is it because they're ashamed because of the coping mechanisms that they're using? You know, I don't know. And they're scared of being judged. I mean, yeah.
But if I was to, like, if someone was to put it, like, culturally, like, speaking, like, men are supposed to be stronger emotionally, you know.
Supposed to be, you
know. And that's why they do not like the concept of therapy, you know, or counseling, you know. And culturally, they think, you know, it makes us feel we're weak, you know. We can handle, you know, your stress, you can handle what the challenges that are come through. And it didn't represent you like a real man. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, no, you're right, Abdulhad. And you know, it's us questioning what masculinity means. You know, Allah likes us in the Quran. He doesn't want us to be arrogant.
That's true.
And you know, like when men think that, oh, I have to be in charge and I have to know all the answers and I have to be able to figure out my problems, that's the ego talking, right? And that's almost like, I think at some point, whether we're a man or a woman, we need to accept that we don't always have the answers. We will always need help, even me. Just because I have a PhD doesn't mean I know everything about everything. I don't, you know? And so I think it's incumbent on us to realize that humility is part of being a human being. And we have to kind of almost massage that idea of what masculinity means. And to say, because being an international student, it's so tough.
It is.
The legal, the financial, the emotional, the cultural, the language, like it's, and I mean, any human, we all have our limits. And a lot of our students, they come from families where there's a history of trauma. You know, like it could be within their own families, maybe it's like emotional trauma, physical trauma, sometimes sexual trauma. But even going back like generations, they're coming from countries that have gone through war. You know, like, I mean, we're talking about places like the partition. The conflict that happened between India and Bangladesh, and Syria, the crisis that happened with the earthquake in Turkey. Like, there's so much trauma that a lot of our students go through there's only so much that people can handle, and after that we break. And it doesn't mean that you're weak, it just means you're human. And I think the men in our community, I think they need to embrace, at the end of the day, yes, I'm a man, but I'm also a human being.
Yeah.
And it's okay for me to sometimes ask for help. And according to the Quran and Allah, it's okay. Our Prophet ﷺ, sometimes he would cry because he did not know the answers to things, and he faced losses too.
True. Yeah.
So anyway, that's my answer to that question.
As much as we talk about international students, we also feel that the domestic students, they feel left out.
The domestic students feel left out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because right now, as a lot of the students who are coming to the masjid, or who are in the scene, are international students. But of course, we do not forget our brothers and sisters who are domestic, students who grew up in this community.
Yeah.
And I believe you have clients, who are domestic students as well.
Yes.
Just for a question, like, are the challenges the same, or are they face different challenges, in life?
Good question, Abdulahad. So I would say that, the majority of my clients are international students.
Okay.
I'm going to say that off the bat, okay? But yes, I do have some domestic students. And I'll tell you what the issue comes up with my domestic students. It's bridging that gap between a lot of the domestic students. They come from immigrant families or refugee families, right? Yes. And so there's an expectation of the families on them, not all the times, but sometimes, to walk a certain line. And sometimes the domestic students are like, oh, I don't know, I grew up here, I speak more English than I speak whatever my native language is, and I think differently from you, mom and dad. And so anyway, that's a lot of what I think a lot of the domestic students that I see, that's the issue, like how to bridge that cultural gap. And in our faith, in our culture, because Islam does come with a culture too, it's to respect the parents, right? And so it's, how do I belong and fit in and also respect my parents? International students, the parents are back home, right? They don't see, but with domestic students, they have to go back home and see mom and dad every day, right?
Sure.
But international students, like a phone call once or twice a week or something, it's very different. And so and because they've kind of faced education here, maybe there's more pressure with, I don't know, the Western lifestyle, and yeah, I would say that's a bigger issue.
Because what we faced, within the community is that a lot of the international students, it's very difficult for them. As one of the challenges for them is to get along with the domestic students, because our challenges are quite a bit different, our expectations, and also like the family, because our families are back home, and really do we visit families, there are some students who actually get the opportunity to visit the families like after 3-4 years,
Absolutely.
And it's very difficult, to stay, and of course, like that teaches a lot of like mental strength, lots of responsibility, and lots of patience, like towards that. But again, sometimes, because in the deen we have a lot of like, people have different challenges when it comes to practicing the deen. And when we are looking at international students, just a question the next question is like, do you think the international students, they have different challenges in practicing the deen than domestic students when it comes to struggling to practice the deen, the reasons for that?
So I just want to make sure I understand your question, Abdulhad. Are you saying that do domestic students and international students, do they differ in terms of they struggle in practicing the deen?
Practicing the deen, yeah. What are the reasons for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard question to answer, Abdulhad. The reason why I say, I think it depends. It's a case-by-case basis. Because it depends. Some domestic students, they come from, mashallah, very religious practicing families, and no question, like, not a big deal, like, and it's I think it's a case-by-case situation. And I have some international students, they come from very religious families back home, but then they come here and they're like, I'm going to have some fun. So, I mean, it's hard to say, right? Quote unquote fun. It doesn't end up being fun, but yeah, I think it's a case-by-case situation. I can't make a broad stroke comparing the practice of the deen from international to domestic students. So, but I would say to you, Abdulhad, talking from my experience as an international student, I felt closer to my dean when I was an international student than when I was a domestic student. Because when I was a domestic student, I knew lots of people in the community. My family was around, blah, blah, whatever. In Canada, I know how the culture works, blah, blah. But when I went to the US and I didn't know anybody, wow, that's when it's like, I need to have something to hold on to. And that's when my faith became so important to me. But that was my journey. It doesn't mean that it's everybody's journey.
If a student comes and says, you know, like, and something I believe it's a very, very like rampant situation within the community, especially from the youth perspective, is that identity crisis.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
basically, if someone comes to you, you know,
yes.
and says, you know, like, I'm going through that, like, difficult conversation with myself, you know, like, what is my identity, right? And I'm just have to take some time, you know, like, to actually answer that question, you know. Like, how would you advise, or how would you, like, advise them to actually, like, take care of that situation? Because a lot of the people, when they have, let's say, doubt, even though they come from really religious families, they might have doubts about Islam. They might have doubts about, you know, like, certain aspects of it, you know. And of course, like, a lot of the doubts they come from the media, you know.
Yes,
from,
of course.
like, social media.
Oh,
as well,
big time.
Always, yeah. TikTok or Instagram, right?
Yeah.
And when they face those doubts, you know, it's very difficult for them to even speak to another, you know. It's really, really, like, slight chances of getting a safe space to speak about, you know,
yes.
those topics, you know.
Yes.
But when these kind of clients come to you, know, like, how would you actually advise them, you know, to that period, to actually go through that period, you know, of you know, like, finding their identity, you know, in place?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question too, Abdulhad. And I'm trying to see how can I answer that question succinctly. So again, it's meeting clients where they're at. It's very important to me as a Muslim chaplain to not judge and criticize my students or anybody who comes in to see me. Because, you know, we're all human at the end of the day. And we're all searching at the end of the day, and we all have our own journeys. Somebody who may be partying and drinking and drugging today, 10 or 15 years from now, might be the most religious person.
Yeah.
And the person who's really religious right now, 10, 15 years, they may be losing the faith, right? So we don't know how things are going to go. So I think it's very important for me, first of all, not to judge my clients because they need a safe space. And if they know they're going to be judged by me, they're not going to open up. And I cannot help anybody with their identity crisis if they don't feel safe to let me know where they're at. I don't care what you're doing as a Muslim student. I really don't care. I hear you, I feel you, because I've probably gone through something similar. And another, like, something that comes up quite a bit in my office is the queer identity.
Yeah.
And, you know, being queer, being Muslim, what's that about? So, you know, it's like I really have to meet students where they're at. So to answer your question, how do I help students? I meet them where they're at. I absolutely do not judge them. Allah is the only one who's supposed to judge, not me. And I try to understand, well, what are their values? What's important to them? What gives them life? You know, what makes them happy? And, you know, maybe I might. So it's really it's about questioning. And really figuring out my clients and maybe encouraging them, well, have you tried this, or have you thought about this, or what about this? So I'm using questions. I'm not telling people what to do. You see? So that's also very important.
Like, as for all the decisions, you know, coming from them when they're actually looking at all the possibilities, questioning themselves is much more better for them. Yes.
Even myself, Adil, had like, I know a lot of people look at me and like, oh, she doesn't wear hijab. And, you know, even me, I'm in my own journey in terms of my own identity as a Muslim woman. 100%. Because I'd have to say, so, I mean, wearing the hijab, I mean, it's a hard thing for me. And it's something that I do think about. And it's still hard for me because I realize Islamophobia is a real thing. My hat goes off to all my hijabi sisters and niqabi sisters. Like, mashallah, I have so much respect for both. And for myself, I feel like It's a journey in my own identity because I'm a single woman and I have to make my own money and pay these bills, and you know what recession is like. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much Islamophobia out there. How much money will I make if I'm wearing a hijab? I'll probably lose half of my clients who, anyway, it's my own, I'm going through my own process.
No.
I know the hijab is very important and it's something that, anyway, all this to say is that I'm going through my own identity and I have crises in certain parts too. I'm not perfect.
We ask Allah to make it easy for you.
I mean, yes, that's my goal, yes. Yeah.
Another question that comes along is that Muslim sisters who are coming here as international students, that journey, coming along, alone here, and without any support. And of course, we know that the journey of a Muslim brother and a Muslim sister are two very different, very different, right?
Big time.
So, but because Muslim sisters, the first word or the first thing that comes is safety, being safe, here, here, So, especially as you mentioned about hijab, about niqab,
yes.
Of course, and Islamophobia is of course a real challenge, right? And I believe you also had clients, who might have gone through that journey or might have gone through instances where they felt unsafe,
Oh, yes.
How do you address, and how do you advise, Muslim sisters specifically, like a ray of hope, to practice the deen, and to practice the hijab? Because those who are actually practicing, they try the level best and they put their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection.
Yes.
But also that level of stress, that level of, still there is that factor of, unsafe is still there,
Mm-hmm.
But how do you advise them, to be a bit
Yeah. Yeah, another hard question. So I've been very lucky, I would have to say. The female clients who have come to me have always been, I'm a hijabi and I want to take it off. And I'll have to say, alhamdulillah, they didn't. And I'm like, what did I do? Or what did they do? It's not me. At the end of the day, it's Allah, really, because I only help, and ultimately He's the one who has the power and the control, not me. And I don't know what it is I said to help in that process, but I wish I could remember. But I have to say, alhamdulillah, I think it's a process of really figuring out, well, why do you want to take it off? How important is that to you at the end of the day? I should ask these questions to myself. I should be counseling myself. What's really important to you? And what do you think your life will be like if you were to take it off? Those are some of the questions that if I remember correctly, that I asked. And I do know sisters, they weren't my clients, but they were wearing hijab and they took it off, right? And I know a few of them, they did go for counseling, but they didn't go for counseling with someone who was Muslim, the ones that I'm thinking of. I don't know if that had anything to do with it. Maybe they were already on their own journey to wanting to take it off, and maybe they didn't want to see someone Muslim. I don't know, because that probably would have made the struggle harder. I don't know. But I don't know if I answered your question, but it's really about exploring why they want to take it off and the reasons that they want it. Is that really important to them? Why is that important to them? What is they imagine their life to be like once they put it on or take it off? Yeah, those things.
The next question is about Muslim scholars and psychologists. Can they work hand in hand?
And what?
Can they work hand in hand,
Oh, absolutely. I want them to work hand in hand. So, as you may know, Abdullah, I do some work with MIA, the Manitoba Islamic Association. And I've done some work with some of the sheikhs, and I'm thinking one in particular, and no, two in particular, and it's been wonderful. I love it when I work with the sheikhs, because they know so much about the faith that I don't know. I can provide the psychological knowledge, and I know this much about Islam, but they know this much about Islam, right? So I can provide the psychological knowledge, and they can provide the Islamic one. I mean, I know a little bit of Islamic knowledge, but I'm not any sheikha or anything like that, obviously. And so I would love for that to happen on a more regular basis, but here's the but. I would prefer if the religious scholars and if they get their own training
Yes.
in mental health, even if it's like a mental health first aid training or a basic course in counseling skills, because I think it can be easy to come across as judgy or judgmental, and sometimes that puts people off, I think, sometimes a little bit. I don't think the sheikhs are meaning to be that way.
No.
But because their heart is full of good intentions, they just want people to be closer to Allah, right? But it's just, that's the only thing, that's the only but, the only caveat that I would put to that.
Yeah. So there's a sheikh by Sheikh Musa Khan. He's from Toronto area, and he did an episode where he said, Imam needs counseling. No, sometimes the imam in the
That's
community,
fair.
the ulama,
That's
also
fair.
they also have the fair share of challenges in life, But
Fair.
who does their counseling at the
Fair.
end of the day,
Fair.
So that's where the question comes from, like if they can work hand in hand,
Yes.
that would be like amazing, And people should weigh in, like appropriately, the weight of it, the
Yeah.
deen, and also
Yeah.
like of course the emotional state of
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
When both are like practiced together or like do it together, it's an amazing journey,
Yeah. No, it's a great point, Abdullah, because our sheikhs, they are so busy and they have so much stress on their shoulders, and who knows what kind of traumas they're faced to. Absolutely. Why not them get their own personal counseling? I all for that.
100%.
When I was trained to be a psychologist, I had to get my own counseling.
Oh.
So, and there are times when I still go because my job is very stressful. I need to make sure that my mental health is on the right place.
Mashallah.
So I've gone through my own journey.
My final question, imagine an international student comes in first day in university. What would be your advice to them?
Find community. That's my first piece of advice. Find community and make sure the community is the community that's going to lead you to healthy behaviors.
No.
That will support you to be a healthy person, to have healthy relationships, to study, which is what you came here for, and that you're going to feel confident at the end of the day.
Thank you for watching. If you like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And we look forward to see you all in the next episode, where inshallah we'll be speaking about other important aspects of our life. Thank you so much.